What would you do if overnight the company that you helped build was suddenly sold and you were out of a job? Welcome back to the Healthcare Wayfinders. In this bonus episode, I'm thrilled to sit down with someone who has had a massive impact on my own entrepreneurial journey, Frank Tighe. Frank has worn many hats in the healthcare industry, from scaling and selling successful health tech companies to mentoring founders and now investing in the next generation of game-changing startups. In this episode, Frank shares the pivotal moments that shaped his career, from navigating an unexpected company sale that forced him into entrepreneurship, to building and exiting his own healthcare startup, and ultimately transitioning into venture capital. He breaks down the real-world lessons that he's learned about resilience, competition, innovation, and what it takes to build a sustainable business in healthcare. If you're an entrepreneur, investor, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, you won't want to miss this conversation. Frank brings a wealth of knowledge and hard-earned wisdom and some fascinating behind-the-scenes stories about the challenges and triumphs of scaling in the healthcare industry. Let's dive in. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Healthcare Wayfinders podcast. I've got with me my dear friend, Frank Tighe. Frank has been a mentor to me and has helped me through so many possible pitfalls in my journey of running a healthcare startup. And I really wanted to get him on here because he's been a trailblazer in the health tech space, and I wanted to share his story with all of you. So, Frank, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Zach. It's an honor. And Zach and I were talking before we started. I'm just so proud of what you've done with Grassroots Labs, and your passion and energy, and what you're doing to bring affordability and access to patients is just so important, especially at this time where so much has gone on in the healthcare system, where so many acquisitions have happened and larger companies control most of the share. And when you have no competition, price rises and choice shrinks. And I just think what you're doing, especially in the lab space, is so important. So I'm thrilled to be with you. I loved watching your journey, and I know you're going to continue to be successful, and I just appreciate being here.
Thanks so much, Frank. Hey, let's talk and share with the audience some of your story. You're a VC investor here in Atlanta now, but you've done a lot of different things, including building super successful healthcare technology companies. So take us back as far as you want to go, and tell us about your journey and how you got from there to here.
It's interesting. I would say an accidental entrepreneur. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, and my dad was a small business owner, what everyone says now is an entrepreneur. And he had 7 children in private school, and I saw payroll that he was making, and the stress and the personal guarantees. And all my brothers are entrepreneurs. And I looked at that and said, wow, that's risky. I'm going to go to school. I ended up getting an MBA. I ended up running a healthcare company based in Switzerland, rose to the ranks kind of a thing. But I didn't decide to become an entrepreneur. Our company was acquired by one of the biggest eye care companies in the world. And I was in my office on a Friday, and the founder, I ran the US division with 2 other guys, and we were 60% of the sales and all the profits of this 100-year-old medical device company, a storied brand, the Rolex of eye surgery. And his son was going to come along and take over the business, and we were always going to run the US, and we were 60% of the sales and all the profits. And it was a pretty sweet gig. I had 3 kids in private school and a wife that didn't work outside the home. She had retired because we have triplets, which is a whole nother story. And it's a lot of pressure and all that, but having the time of my life. And he walked into my office on a Friday during the Olympics in 1996. And he said, what would you do if you didn't work here? And that is a statement or a question that changed the arc of my future career. I had never thought about going anywhere else. I didn't network. I loved the healthcare space. I knew all the manufacturers and all the salespeople and all the physicians in this space of retinal surgery. And I just was in love with my job and my team. And we were the top of the stack, and our margins were great, and we were innovative. We would license technology from universities like Duke and Johns Hopkins, and then we would pay a royalty to the university, and then we would get FDA approval and approval around the world in our distributor network, and then sell these innovative devices. And I just loved it. And my whole world, business-wise, was in this world. And I didn't even know what to say. And he said to me, we thought we would never sell, and this company offered us this unbelievable. They actually said to us, name a number, and we named a crazy number, and they said yes. And so now this
Wow.
is going to happen. And he said, we also will get a bump if we can cut costs before. And so before we close the acquisition, there's an EBITDA multiple here. And if we cut some costs, and you've got your MBA, you're a smart guy, I figure you can work it out. Go home this weekend, talk to Ellen, your wife, and tell me what you think. So I could stay and beg or show how I can help get it to the finish line, but I've never been that kind of guy. I'm like, if he thinks it's better for him and his family, this has been a great run, but I'm in a panic. So I go home and I'm whispering in the bathroom to my wife that, hey, the company's being sold and I'm going to be out of work. And we have guests in our home and we're like trying to be calm and not portray panic. And I'm thinking, get these 3 kids in private school. It was just one of those moments where I had to look and say, so I had all these options, right? There's all these in Memphis and in Dallas and all these healthcare centers, but I would have to move. We live in Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta, Georgia is an amazing entrepreneurial community, and amazing all the Fortune 100s and Fortune 50s that are here from UPS and Delta and our airport. It's an amazing place to build a company and to run a company. And there's so much advantage to being in Atlanta. And all my kids, obviously my family's here, my relatives are here, my siblings, my church, my community. And the idea of leaving Atlanta was just in a panic. And I had all these opportunities because of the position that I was in. I was getting offers, but I didn't want to move to Dallas. And so my wife and I sat down and did the little Ben Franklin T close on a yellow sheet of paper. What are all the reasons for trying to stay here? And then why would we leave? And the only one on the left-hand side of the column for leaving was money. And we've never really, of course, we all need it, and you have to educate your children and you have to eat and all those things. But I never have really done anything for money. If you do the right things and you work hard and you're innovative, it'll follow, an opportunity comes. And I've never worried about that. But, and so both of us, we just can't do it. And it's an important part of the story for all the entrepreneurs out there. I have a mentor group, like, that I work with that are CEOs and founders of small businesses. And we would get together and go on trips. And my wife always said, those are boondoggles. But we would go skiing in Whistler or whatever, but we also brought our board decks and we would talk about our problems and cash flow and we would share with each other. And one of those people was my brother, who's a very successful entrepreneur. And he said to me, why are you going to go to Dallas and take this offer? You ran the company in the US on this senior team. And now you're going to go report to the guy that reports to the guy. You're going to uproot your family and go to Texas. Why are you going to do that? All the manufacturers, all the technology, all the doctors, you could do this yourself. And I always had thought, wow, I do have that experience and it's been great to be in this amazing company. But I just had that fear. And so
Yeah.
I'm a guy, for any of you out there, I know more entrepreneurs that started down this path because they had a job change later in their career and they couldn't either replace what they were making, or they thought, wow, this shook my worldview. My worldview was there was safety in this company that was dominant and that I was set. And I didn't even network. I would go to trade shows and people would try to talk to me about jobs. And I was just a jerk. I just loved what I did. We had a PMS color for our marketing for our collateral material, and it was PMS 285 blue. That was Grease Hubbard Blue, the company, Swiss company that I ran. And I used to say, if you cut me, I bleed 285 blue. So this sort of narrow-minded, I'm loyal,
Yeah.
and then the loyalty wasn't returned. When the minute the deal came, oh, I love you, you're my family, but we're going on without you. And it was a shock. So in those moments, I began to think about it. And one of my customers, a miracle, one of my customers was the head of Johns Hopkins lab. And we had a right of first refusal at Johns Hopkins. We paid them, at the time, it wasn't a lot, which was amazing, but it was $1 million a year guaranteed if in the beginning when we would license things, and then 5% of net sales. And then eventually it exceeded that by a lot. But in the beginning, we paid them $1 million a year, whether we sold enough or not. And then it was 5% of net sales as the license agreement arrangement with a major university. But we weren't always grabbing every idea they had. And they also had Bausch and Lomb and some others. And there were lots of great ideas being left undeveloped that they had patents for because people couldn't see it and understand how good it would be. And he called me and he said, hey, I want you to come and see me. And he had an idea for himself. He needed to get these instruments out of the lab that my company wasn't picking up on because it wasn't on our radar. It was too low. And I had never looked at some of these jewels that he had in the box because we were going for the things that were more developed and further along and big hits, right? And so I went up to Johns Hopkins and he showed me all of these designs and ideas that they had. And I knew right away that they were winners, 100%, because you would know it too if you were in this business. I had been in the OR thousands of times, operating room thousands of times. And I see these ideas and I start to realize, wow, these are consumable medical devices that would help the patient and improve their vision, and they're needed. And it was then I started getting the idea together and I met with my brother in this group and I started talking to them about it. And they said, this is really important. When someone says, I want to start a new company, say in healthcare, because my mother had cancer, it's admirable. But did you work in a compounding pharmacy? Do you have deep technical expertise in the space? Have you been a researcher where you realize, oh, this T cell issue is where we should focus? You don't know enough, but when you have expertise in the space and something comes along, it was like the light just came on in the room. I was in the dark and the light came on, and I started to see it. And then he did the most amazing, incredible thing. He said, here is a contract that we've negotiated with someone else. Go into Word and globally replace their name with yours, pick a company name, and we'll do the 5% of net sales and we won't charge you the minimum. So if we don't sell, we don't pay. And we have to pay the patent cost to prosecute all the patents. And what happens is in these situations in university labs, if you don't take them, they put milestones in. So you have to get FDA approval and you have to hit the sales. Otherwise, people would just take them all and never just put them on the shelf. And so what was happening was these big companies, including even our own, weren't looking at these things. And I immediately came out of there very excited that, wow, I know the distributors, I know the salespeople, I know the industry, I know the customers. I could get founder-led sales is a big thing when you're in a company. Your previous connections will buy from you because of who you are if you have something interesting. But we wanted to have a premise for this company, and we called it Retina Labs because we were in the retinal eye space. And I always found that if you were trying to teach a doctor something new, like I had a friend and he's the CEO of and still I think it's going to be very successful, but it's a technology for radiation in breast cancer. But women don't want to be touched, they don't want to be squeezed, and they don't want radiation. And this is a different way to get the imaging. But what you're doing is you're educating, and it takes a long time. Now, the gold standard for a doctor is radiation and these imaging, right? And so if you convince them that, oh, this is better because of all these reasons, what if it misses something? Or people just don't trust it. And so it takes longer to build that. And he's done a great job and it's doing well. Our idea was we want to give them a better mousetrap. We don't want to change the flow of the way they're doing it, but we want to improve their outcomes so patients have better vision. I was really driven by this. So I'll make it simple. So if you had a pair of forceps and you would pick up tissue in the back of the eye, slippery and it slips out, what if we put diamonds in there and then it would grip? We had one of our most successful products is really silly, but we have a patent for it. And they would use a little cannula to get fluid off the back of the retina. It's very difficult and very delicate because the retina is so delicate. And you have to get this fluid off at the end of the procedure. The Johns Hopkins had an idea that the current cannula, the silicone tip was clear. And you can't see it when there's blood in the eye. You just can't see it. And they said, what if we made it green? Because then green is the opposite of red on Braun's color wheel, and then you'd be able to see it. It glows in the dark like a Star Wars toy. And so we went in the lab at Hopkins on a pig, and the nurses were there, and everyone's looking through the microscope, and they're all going, wow, this is amazing. And can you imagine something as simple as changing the color to provide visibility so the surgeon can do this fine work became a monster hit. But at the time, all I knew was I'd been in enough surgeries to know that's a problem, and wow, who would buy clear when you could have green? And so our journey started with, can we select these ideas? And also from Duke and Hopkins and others and famous surgeons. We wanted a key opinion leader to promote these things because these surgeons, and like many industries, they're heavily influenced by respected experts. And so if the top surgeon in the world is using this and he goes to a conference and shows it, everybody wants to use it because the expert is saying you should use it. And so we focused on things that would change the outcome and improve vision for these patients, but we're trying to educate and teach you something new. So all of our things, like they put air in the eye, and Hopkins came to us and said, we have this humidifier idea. People are getting cataracts. They go in for retinal surgery and they're getting a cataract because the air dries out the lens. We should humidify the air. And that's a consumable. So we always did consumables too, because you need recurring revenue.
Yeah.
One of the bigger mistakes we made, we found out they used lenses on the eye to see into the back of the eye to magnify into the microscope. And they were made out of quartz. And you'd have different angles of the lenses so you could see far into the edge of the eye, and you'd change the different ones, or one that has a bubble on it that would magnify bigger. But they would scratch and they would chip and they would break. And Hopkins came to us and said, if you made these out of sapphire, has a higher refractive index, you'll get more magnification, you'll see further out. No one will use quartz after this. And we got the artificial quartz and we did the R&D on it. And when we released it, it was a monster hit because they didn't scratch, they didn't break, they didn't chip, and they allowed the surgeon to do more fine detail and not damage the retina that they're trying to save.
Okay.
But we made a huge business error. Because they don't chip and scratch and break, you never need to replace them. So you go out and you sell 5,000 sets and you're done unless they lose one. And one of my friends said, why don't you make this consumable? That's crazy. It was early in my journey. I didn't understand the company also. And it would be cheaper to manufacture some synthetic product, but we had a patent. It was a great product. We sold it for a ton. But that learning of how to be a business person while you're helping people too. And it's actually better because if you have to re-sterilize something, maybe you didn't clean it, somebody could get an infection. But if it's consumable and sealed, it's safer.
Yeah.
And they throw it away on every case, and then you have recurring revenue. So part of this was a kid. I go back a little bit in my journey. I'm a kid of 7 children, and I'm one of the brothers, and we're all entrepreneurial, and we're having candy stands, and we're selling donuts. I've always had that in my blood, but I just had that fear. Yeah. If I went back to even college, you realize the skills that you get stack. And one of the big things in my life, themes, has been to look for the blessing in every single setback. So I have to pay my way through school because my dad's 7 kids, all of us in college. It's just impossible. So I lived in Auburn, and the in-state choices for me were Auburn or Alabama. And the girl that I was dating went to Auburn. So that shows how the male 18-year-old brain thinks. I didn't think about the best school for me or my future in business or anything. Anyway, but I loved Auburn. But I went early in the summer and I got a job in a record store. Maybe some really younger people won't know what that is, but record albums. It was and they hired me. So I wait a month later, I come back to school and I come in, the manager says, oh, I'm sorry, we hired someone else. I'm like, what are you talking about? I got to pay my rent and tuition at school starting, and we had an agreement. And so I'm sorry. So I walk out and I'm on the street and I'm despondent. I don't even know how I'm going to pay my rent. I just don't. I worked all summer and saved up, so I had runway like a startup. You have to have a little cash in the kitty that you raise from your friends or family. So I've got a cushion, but the clock is ticking. And I expected to walk in and punch in, right? So I went up and down the street knocking on all the doors, but in my mind, I'm defeatist.
Yeah.
Everybody already has these jobs. School is starting today. No one is going to hire me, but I just pushed myself to keep knocking. And I went to the best clothing store in town. And the guy, it happened to be that his manager was out that day and he was shorthanded. He goes, I'll try you out now. Well, my dad had designed and manufactured clothing, so I had experience in this world. And so I went and helped a lot of customers, and I sold a bunch of stuff. And he goes, okay. And he hired me. And it turned out to be way better than the record store because I was learning sales skills. But I didn't know that at the time. So it was a blessing that happened, and that I didn't turtle. That you have to have resilience, like for what you're doing. It's never just up and to the right. You're going to have experience all of these problems. Right? So I'm doing this job, and it leads to my first job in college. I'm graduating, and I go up to Atlanta. In this clothing business, there were all types of brands, shoes and pants and ties and shirt. And one of the biggest shirt brands in the world was the one that we carried in our store, and I knew their salesperson. And they introduced me to the sales manager, and I got an interview in Atlanta. And so I go up to see him. And even when I was in college, I had this friend group where we were sharing ideas, and we had been sharing these sales tapes by a guy named Tom Hopkins, and he was a big
Okay.
sales trainer back in the 80s. And but he, to me as a kid, the things that he was saying were so cringy. I didn't actually think that I could say the words, right? But it's so important to the story that I know I'm too long-winded here. But I get in the interview and I show up, and I'm from the South. He's from New York, and he's Manhattan, lives in Manhattan. He's a hard-charging New York sales guy. And I come in and I'm in a seersucker suit with a yellow tie with white bucks. I don't know if you know what those are, but I look like Colonel Sanders or something, like a Southern. And I'm yes sir, no sir, yes sir, no sir, Southern guy, polite. And I'm doing the interview, and he's just practically asleep. And he says, "You seem like a really nice guy. Nice guys really don't make it in sales. I tell you what, why don't you send me another copy of your resume, and we'll keep it on file." I'm not getting the job, right? This is not going well, and it's
Yeah.
over. And I've told all my friends and my fraternity brothers and my girlfriend, I'm getting this job, and I'm going to go work for this company. And in that moment, will you have the strength to do the thing that you don't think you can do, right? And so I've listened to all these tapes. To me, they sound closing statements and asking for the order sound cringy and just awful. I just didn't think I could do it. I listen to these things and go, he doesn't really talk like that. And so then he stands up and he's going to lead me out of the booth at the menswear mart in Atlanta downtown. So
Uh-huh.
I turn to him and I say, "Listen, Mr. Newberger, if I wanted to mail a copy of your resume, I wouldn't have driven here from Auburn today." I said, "Look, if I can share enough information with you today to let you see that I'm the guy, are you willing to place me in the territory today?" And he goes, "Tiger, where have you been?" And we sit back down. He starts the interview, and he saw that I could get out of the trap and ask for the order. And I get this job, which was unbelievable, but it led to this great learning in sales, right? My first job is in Los Angeles, and they moved me out to California, and I'm from the South, and just it's such a beautiful, it's great weather, but if you don't have a beautiful car and a lot of money and you're in LA, it's
Yeah.
very difficult
Yeah.
environment. But I learned from this great mentor. I have so many great mentors in my life taught me about expense discipline and all these things. But all these skills were stacking. The resilience never quit. And then a friend of mine was in healthcare with that Swiss firm that I eventually ended up running. And I met him in Atlanta when I was home for a break. And what he was doing was so cool. These instruments that were made in Switzerland, one at a time under the microscope. And he said, "Hey, we have an opening. I'll introduce you to my boss." And I came and interviewed, and I ended up getting the job and taking a territorial job, and then moving up in the company and eventually running it. But their sort of motivation was the same as mine for my own when I started it, was this passion for improving vision, that new technology can help patients, that you're always innovating and always developing. And so we ended up in my company with 150 different individual line items. And another part of this learning journey, I know I'm a little scattered, is that
I
some of
love it,
the
Frank.
things that you hate to do, some of the things that you hate to do will help you the most. So in our company, when I was running it with this team in the US, anything that wasn't sales was one of the guys, and the finance guy. Everything else came to me. So R&D, FDA, and I was the VP of marketing. But I had all these other things, and I hated the FDA, hated the process and the CE mark and the GMP and the good manufacturing practices and the manuals and all the tests. It was just awful. But what happened was, because I learned all of that and I knew how to file 510Ks, these approvals that you need for the types of devices we were selling. When I started my own company, I could do it myself. And when you don't have capital early on, you have to do a lot of things yourself. You're wearing
Yeah.
100 hats. You're doing some of the development, and I've watched your journey too. And you're selling, and you're also hiring and managing. And so the thing that I hated turned out to be amazing. And I'll tell you, for anyone, look for the blessing in every setback. Some of these examples are silly, but you break up with your girlfriend and you meet your wife.
Mm.
You get fired from a job and you get one that you love. Every time in my life, in the moment, I've never thought, even when you're frightened or when I lost that job because they were selling the company, every time it's better. I said to my wife one day, they sold to Alcon and then it just disappeared and became a brand, that storied 100-year-old company. I said to her, I'm not there, but they're not there. there's no permanency. You have to change. You have to be a lifelong learner. You have to adapt. And so it was great that happened to me, not a terrible thing, because it went on and led to me starting my own business and having a successful exit to a public company. But each one of these things have been look for the blessing. I'll give you one more example. Remember I told you about that green cannula that we have, right? It was
Yeah.
revolutionary. We were selling tons of them. But I only had distribution in 30 countries. So our sales were what they were. They were great, and the margin was incredible, and we had a patent, and it was great. The world's biggest eye care company just started selling my product. They just took it and said that they were ignoring my patent. And we were a small company, and they were like kicking sand in my face. Come and get me, startup boy. They have lawyers on staff, and I'm paying an outside counsel. And what am I going to do? And so, for all of you entrepreneurs out there, even your healthcare companies, and you have a patent, the patent's only as good as your ability to defend it, right? You can have it, but
Yeah.
people can infringe on it. What are you going to? There's no patent police. You can't run to them and show them your patent. And for me, it was so obvious. We had a patent on the visibility of all colors other than clear. And they were absolutely making our exact product. But what happened was when we sold our company to another public company, part of our agreement was they had to use their best reasonable commercial efforts to go and get this back. And now I had a big brother with a lot of capital, another public company. So a minute into us being purchased and them negotiating, Alcon was like, wow, oh yeah, oh, we're sorry, we didn't know. And a whole different tone. And then
Yeah.
we ended up settling for a royalty amount on global royalty that was way more than I could ever get. So then now, as the founder, part of our agreement was I got a lot of that. So February, May, August, and November, I would get a wire, and a massive wire, and for the royalties on this. And now I'm in 30 countries. They're in 130 countries. And they
Wow.
have sales reps everywhere, and they're selling it like crazy. So now I don't make it. I don't worry about the FDA approval and the patents. I don't stock the inventory. I don't pay sales reps. I just wake up and it comes to me every quarter for the life of the patent. So was that a bad thing? I wish they would take some more things. But my lesson for my children and other entrepreneurs that I deal with is you don't know in the moment when you have a setback that's really a setback.
Yeah.
That you have to look for the blessing and the long term in these things. That every time I've had one of these things, it's always been for the good. So
I
that's
love it.
sort of my origin story and we started Retina Labs, and then we eventually sold it to a company in Mountain View, California, and then I became a public company VP of marketing. And I thought, wow, I'm going to learn so much, and they're a great company, but it's slow. And in what you're
Yeah.
doing, you're innovating quickly and changing the platform and adding features that this would take 20 signatures to get a new product done, and we would do that in a day. And it was frustrating for a guy that was used to moving faster,
Yeah.
but they had a very big ship and a lot more at risk. And I could tell you some more stories off camera, but it was a great experience for me. But
Uh,
then you mentioned ATDC. So
yeah.
ATDC is a tech incubator at Georgia Tech. And the goal really is economic development for the state of Georgia. The idea is if we start startups here and we bring venture capital and investment dollars here, that Georgia economy will grow because they hired those people and they all pay taxes and the company pays taxes. And it's worked out incredibly well. My lawyer who had done our transaction on our exit said, you should check out ATDC. They're looking for founders who've raised capital with an exit to help other people like you, Zach. And because you can be smart and you can speak Mandarin, but if you've never seen a term sheet from a venture capitalist, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. You have to understand what all of these terms mean. And I would caution anyone that's raising money, you need to go to school and get a great law firm that knows every one of these terms and what they mean, and be super careful about taking outside capital.
This is
But
coming from the
so
VC
anyways,
friends.
yeah, I'm telling you that, we're our firm has this philosophy that we want it to be win. We
Yeah.
want you to do well. We want to do well, and we want to make your company investable, and we want you to be an investor in our next fund. We have a long-term view. We're not going to put crazy terms in the term sheet, but there are a lot of VCs who will do that. And we're capitalists. We want to make a profit, but we feel like the best way is to be honorable and decent and a man of your word. And all of my partners are that way, and that's why I'm here, which is just incredible. But back to ATDC. So ATDC, I go down and I meet them, and they're like, wow, you've started a company and had an exit and raised capital. We need you. We need you to help. will you come and do 20 hours a week in a role on the research faculty called Entrepreneur in Residence? And so I do it. I fall in love with it. I'm meeting CEOs like you, and I'm helping them with a structure to build on a structure of concrete and steel and not sand. For instance, if you want to raise venture capital or outside money, you really need to be a Delaware C Corp, the structure of it, and not an LLC, because the Delaware C Corp has two classes of stock, and investors get preferred stock. And if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have that structure, you're not set up to raise money. And these entrepreneurs don't know, if they hire people and they give away some of the stock, if they quit, the stock goes out the door. And so you have to structure it where, if you're going to give employees stock, do a 1 year cliff where it doesn't kick in for a year, and then a 4 year vesting. So then you have time over time to make sure that the relationship is two way and they're doing a great job and you want to keep them.
Yeah.
If you just give them a chunk of stock and then they quit, it's a mistake. And so there are all these mistakes that I've made. I've had two companies, American Medical Devices, the first one that I started, then Red Lab. And it matters. These things matter in the end. And you really have to begin with the end in mind if you're going to start a company. So I came down and I worked at ATC and loved it. And I was doing open ocean sailing with my brother and playing golf. And I was semi-retired. I didn't think really that I would work again. And I fell in love with ATDC. And then they came to me and they said, hey, would you be willing to be the lead entrepreneur in residence? That means you would find others who had exited and bring them in and help build this team. And I just loved it. I loved all the CEOs. And the idea that I could give back in a way, a lot of people say I was giving back. I don't really love that term. I was, but it was because it was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I had this experience that would help you because you haven't seen a term sheet before or haven't scaled, or you might need help raising money or introduction to a good lawyer, or what does a pitch deck look like? What's your first board meeting and what does that look like? So all of us that did that work loved it. And what happened to me is, by giving and being there and giving my time, I ended up meeting my future partner, Sid Mukherjee. And Sid is an amazing entrepreneur. He had 3,000 employees in 9 countries and did 14 acquisitions and sold his company to private equity. And then it got sold to Cognizant, monster exit. And he came to Georgia Tech and gave a significant gift to give back to entrepreneurship. And that's when we met. And he came and volunteered as an EIR. And we became very close friends. And then he asked me to be on the board. Actually asked me to be a partner when they started the fund, but I had just done a 13-year run with Retina Labs, and I was having fun with my wife, and I was doing 20 hours a week with Georgia Tech, which was enough just for fun. And I wasn't ready. But then I was on the board and I helped him raise some money and help build the first pitch deck and stuff. And then he called me and said, hey, we're going to hire another partner. Will you interview them? And I interviewed the guy and I liked him. I said, I think he'd be great, but would you consider me? Because now it's been 3 years and I'm ready to go do the next thing. And he was just shocked that I was willing to do it. And they brought me on as the newest partner 3 years ago. So now I've gone full circle from being a salesperson to a sales manager to a VP to then a business owner with an exit to an advisor to startups. And now I'm not a healthcare guy anymore because I'm a technology guy because we're doing software. And it's ironic, our fund doesn't invest in healthcare, which sort of bums me out because I love the industry so much. But anyway, that's where I am now. And I still run the angel investing group at Georgia Tech called Angel Lounge to help bring capital to companies like yours and others, and to get high net worth individuals interested in investing in startups, many of them in healthcare in Georgia. My story where I am now, entrepreneur all the way to VC. And honestly, I think my wife looks at me and goes, you're a VC? No, it's funny. You need a spouse to keep you humble. I've been married. I have triplets. I've been married for 36 years and I just have the most wonderful, amazing spouse. One thing I didn't do was tell you an important part of my story. Everyone needs a partner like I have in life.
Yeah.
She's prayerful and lovely and amazing. But when in that bathroom discussion where I was going to lose my job, she had been a very successful salesperson at Merck. And when you have triplets, you can't really go back to work. It's a full-time job. But they were now in kindergarten. And she said, I'm going to go back to work. We need this. And she jumped in. And Merck wasn't quite ready. They loved her and she had a great reputation. They weren't ready to hire her. She went and temped at UPS, making copies and getting coffee, and just unbelievable. And then I didn't take the salary from the business for the first 2.5 years. And I drove her old minivan, and we went from my company car being really sweet and the whole package I had to living at home and not eating out. And we found out we paid a lot less in tax, and we were still lived in the same house, and we were still happy, and that all we didn't need all of that really. But she went back and got a sales job at Merck, and she was the driver that allowed us to wait to raise money at a higher valuation when we had more sales that made a more meaningful exit. Without my wife Ellen, none of this ever would have happened. And very fortunate as you are to have a lovely wife, and the triplets now are 32, and it was incredible, just a journey for them too. But happy father and really enjoying my work with my partners. I'll say one other thing about the firm here. So Silicon Road Ventures is an early stage venture capital fund. We have about $100 million under management under two funds. We have a $31 million seed fund, and then an early growth fund of about 65. And what we do is we invest in teams of entrepreneurs that we love, repeat entrepreneurs, maybe one that didn't have the greatest exit last time because they know where all the potholes are and the issues are, and they're experienced, passionate, and they understand a lot more. They're not starting from zero. We invest in what we call commerce tech, which is fintech and payments, supply chain logistics, e-commerce, voice commerce, social commerce, some future of work, AI. But what we're looking for is technology. Just like when I was running my company and it was in healthcare, we wanted to provide better outcomes for patients. We're looking for things that improve the profitability of the business, that are game changers, that technology that really matters. So we recently invested in a company called Pitch It out of Austin, Texas. And what they do is they use it's a lead qualification as a service platform. So you have all these leads in your pipeline when you're trying to sell someone. You don't know whether they're hot or cold, and how do you reach them? And what's happened recently is technology has helped a lot because Apple and Google have banned cookies. And so you can't track users as easily with ads and target them. And consumers won't answer phone calls from numbers they don't recognize on their cell phone. And so how do you reach them? They have technology that tracks users across social media. And if they come to the website of the company or they respond to an ad, they can immediately connect them to a salesperson right then, where they're the highest moment of purchase intent, or book an appointment right then and not lose them. And they use AI chatbots to do that. And they're increasing sales like 30%.
Wow.
So my new passion are these tools that can drive companies forward, that are transformational. And so I've gone from being a healthcare guy to a technology guy, but it's really all the same. Business is business. And for all of you, I don't know if most of your audience are business people or startups in healthcare, but it's the same thing. You have to profitably get growth. You have to keep one eye on cash and one eye on growth. And if you're only on growth, you're going to run out of cash. One of the things I learned early on was that you can grow yourself out of business, because when you start to have hyper growth, you have more payrolls and you hire more people, and you have to fund the gap. And if your customers are large enterprise customers and they pay in 90 days, but you pay your people weekly, how do you fund that gap? You have to have the right capital stack in place for working capital to be able to grow. And being a founder is a tough, lonely journey. I know, Zach, I've been with you quite often and helped you through some situations, but it's having a community is very important. And I know ATDC has been big in your life. So I'm rattling on, not letting you ask me any questions, but I've just been trying to tell you my story.
You're dropping gold for everybody listening, Frank. I'd love to hear, you're a healthcare consumer, just like all of us are. Where would you like to see technology? And I know you're not specifically investing in the healthcare space right now, but where do you want to see innovation happening when it comes to healthcare and honestly people being able to access healthcare more? Like what would you, if you were looking in your crystal ball in the future, where would you want to see things go? Or investors like yourself putting money to push the needle in certain ways?
I would like to see more competition in healthcare, because when there's competition, it drives price and access and innovation. So, for instance, my wife, I'm sorry to say this on the podcast, honey, is now Medicare eligible. And she switched from getting her insurance from Merck as a retiree, gold plated, great, pay for everything, to Medicare, which is a disaster. And there's no competition, and you pay all these premiums and they deny your claims. We couldn't believe how broken it is, at least from our standpoint, to go in for simple procedure or just a regular checkup and then have things denied. And there's no competition. And so there's the prices are what they are, and you're Medicare and you have to do it. Like I work in a firm and we have less than 20 employees. When I eventually turn 65, I can't keep my health care here. I have to go on Medicare. And so the government is taking this over, and it's advertised as a safety net, but the prices and the premiums for Medicare are enormous. And now they've added a new thing
Wow.
called IRMA. So it's based on your income. So you pay an extra premium based on your income. And so now your premium's massive and they don't cover a lot. I think catastrophically it's probably good, but I think in any market, when there's more than one supplier, there can be innovation. And there's so much help now with AI and technology that is driving results on let's say on the therapeutic side and then on the payment side and insurance side. I think our citizens should be covered. I think we should have universal access to healthcare, but I think not through the government, but through more competition, which would drive price and access and availability. And just like any software company where you have tiered usage, you can have the basic plan that covers in case of a catastrophic thing, and then have other options. Like my children are in companies where they do these high deductible plans, and they're
Mm-hmm.
young and healthy, so it probably, unless they get hit by a car or need to go to the emergency room, but they never ever hit their deductible. And so I think it's fundamentally broken, and that we need to look at access to healthcare, affordability of healthcare, and is it a human right to have healthcare? I love what you're doing. You're bringing access to lab tests. We talked about this in the beginning a little bit. The last big ripoff of healthcare are these prices for lab tests because there's no competition. There's two big players, and you can't go and choose a different lab. Really, you're just a patient. You show up and you use their lab, and if that's the starting point, there's never going to be any pressure on the pricing. It's always just going to go up and up, and there's less innovation. And what you're doing, bringing together patients on your platform for the lab tests they need at a better cost. I just think I come from the lens of a business guy who says, if we could put some business people in charge of this, for instance, I know this sounds terrible, go to the post office and go to FedEx. Same kind of product, night and day. Go stand in line to get your driver's license. It's just not pricing, affordability, and access are not the great thing that the government does. They're slow and they're not innovative. And I understand we need a safety net. That's Medicaid. But in insurance, just because you turn 65 and you're forced off the plan that you're on costs the government more. There's so many of these things that I think around access and affordability that would change if we had more competition. I know there was a startup we work with at ATDC, and they used AI to detect fraud in healthcare. And there's so much fraud. Someone would open up a PO box and they would get numbers for physicians' practices, their physician numbers, and they would send bills to Medicare, and Medicare would just pay them billions of dollars in fraud.
Wow.
And they would use AI, really clever, to go out and say, wait a minute, this is a post office box. And how come all of these same patient names are getting high number of procedures than the rest of Michigan? Something's wrong. And then they would be able to investigate and recapture. But why should we recapture? Why shouldn't we put up better protections up front? And there's so much fraud that could go, fraud, waste, and abuse that could go back into the system to help. And
Yeah.
I know we keep getting promises of how this is going to get fixed. And I'm complaining about the problem without a solution, but I know competition and innovation. And if you stifle innovation and competition, the price is only going to go one way and the care is only going to go one way. If you look what's happening with the Veterans Administration and how we treat the vets, it's just a national shame. And so I love these innovators in healthcare that are looking for new ways to do it. I think you recently interviewed Brian Hill
Yep.
on your podcast. Brian is a very top urologist in Atlanta with an incredible practice and gave it up because he believes healthcare should be delivered differently. And he's created this system where he builds these clinics and the small businesses pay him the premium and they get all their treatment, all their primary care treatment from those doctors. And it keeps costs down, it keeps paperwork down. And he's able to deliver an insurance product basically and really a healthcare product to these small businesses that can't afford a big plan that would cover them. And he's built it slowly over time. And it's one model that's just incredible. And it just shows you that if you consolidate and have one billing department instead of 5 different companies, or can get efficiencies around that. I have a friend who owns it's called Georgia Retina, And Georgia Retina is one of the most successful retinal practices in the state of Georgia. I think they have 10 offices all around the state. It's the biggest one. And they sold recently to private equity. And what's happening in healthcare now is private equity is rolling up all these clinics and doctor practices, because what they can do is have one billing department and get more efficient. And then under one company and one platform, they can cut out all the waste on the business side. And so they're making those physicians' practices more efficient and more profitable for the doctors. But that's not that has nothing to do with helping the patient. So the doctors are figuring out how to get competition between these PE companies and get more value for their company, but no one's looking at how to provide more access and more affordability for patients. And with inflation recently, it's just getting more and more expensive. Just as an observer of the system and a guy with business principles, I would love to see more access, more competition, more innovation. And startups are doing that. There's many startups that are working on patient-physician connections, where you're lowering the cost of lab tests. And I think part of that is unbundling. And so where you're in the lab area, there's others that are connecting you to mental health is way ahead, I've noticed. So there are mental health platforms now that if you don't have insurance, they've got the cost down. I think the therapists might be employees of the company, but there's apps where you can go and do Zoom and get mental health care cheaper than if you paid because you haven't met your deductible. So you can just go straight to the physician. So I think that's a movement where there are some physicians and clinics that do self-pay, but self-pay is cheaper. It's a little bit like what GoodRx did. Sometimes you could go to GoodRx and it's cheaper than your copay from your insurance. So you should not tell them about your insurance. You should use GoodRx. Yeah. And it's just because they have more volume and they can give bigger discounts. And I think we need to privatize healthcare in a way that open it up is what I mean, where more private companies are bidding, accessing, and innovating. And some of these things have just been incredible. Some of the biggest developments in cancer have come from these top clinics that are doing studies, driving innovation. I have prostate cancer. And in the past, when you got this, you'd have to wait till it got big enough to get an MRI for it to show up. Now, physicians at Emory invented this new dye, and it only clings to prostate cancer cells. So even when it's in the micro stage, they can inject the dye in your arm, and then it lights up wherever the cancer is, and then they can zap it with radiation and catch it earlier and have great outcomes. But will that be possible if we don't fund that? Will that be possible if there's not competition? And if the government cuts reimbursement for physicians every year and the procedure reimbursement goes down, how long before they go and do something else? Before we do have a shortage of physicians and nurses. And so we need this competition and this excellence and these new developments. How much are we saving in treatments in prostate cancer and other cancers because of these new innovations? I just wish we would open it up more, I think is my theme.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. In closing, this has been so good. I really appreciate you sharing all this. What would you have to say to a new upcoming health tech entrepreneur who wants to do something in the space to help patients, but also needs to build a sustainable business? How would you, if you were still at ATDC and you were advising them, what would you say to them?
In the beginning, I think that you should do what we did at ATDC, which is customer discovery. It's one thing to have a passion and to believe in what you're doing. Do you have the expertise in that industry to be able, do you have a network? Do you have natural customers who would buy from you? And do you have a unique value prop that people will pay for? So is there a customer with the ability and the willingness to pay? And so before we have people build software platforms and spend a lot of money and raise money, we have them go survey 100 customers. What do you think about this idea? Would you buy it in that area? And spend time early finding out what customers want. And then when you build the company, make sure you build a strong foundation. You have to begin with the end in mind. And so the end in mind eventually would be some exit. How do you structure it to raise capital if you want to do that, to get outside capital? And also for taxes, planning for taxes and structuring it properly. There's something called, for young entrepreneurs that haven't done this, there's something called QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. And if you are a C Corp and you hold the stock for 5 years, any profit, the first 10 million is tax-free. And if you don't know that, you might do an LLC. and the clock starts, and it's going to take you 5 years to build it, probably 10. And you have a way if you structure it right with the right lawyer. So I would have a very good lawyer. I would start with the right structure, and I would have a co-founder. It's very important. This is a lonely journey. You have a co-founder in your business, I know, but usually it's perfect if someone's the tech person and someone's the business person. That's a great model if you're in any kind of technology in healthcare, because it's so expensive to develop. And early on, the CTO can do the development, and the business guy or gal can do the sales. And I think having someone together in your company is important to have a co-founder. You have to be really careful how you structure it. I'll give you a couple of quick hits. If you have 4 friends and you're all going to do it and you each get 25%, that's a disaster. Somebody leaves, 25% goes out the door. You're all equal. No one's the leader. You have to have a leader. Every time I structured one of my companies, I would own it all, and I would put the value in, the patents, the license, the early sales. And then if I brought in other people that had equity, head of R&D, manufacturer, then give them equity on a cliff in investing. But you need to be in control of it, because if you want to raise outside money, you have to have enough ownership in the company for the investor to think, okay, they're really invested here. If you had 10%, you might, when it gets hard, you might leave.
Yeah.
You need to have a large majority of the stock in the beginning. And so I would also find a community like ATDC. You can share board decks, you can share experiences. We had a thing we called the CEO Roundtable that you participated in. And the key to it was absolute confidentiality. Everything we talked about in the room, no one shared. And we all had that faith. And so I was just a timekeeper and the leader, but all the CEOs would share their board decks or what they were struggling with or a problem with their co-founder. And you have to have a group of like-minded entrepreneurs to help you. You can't do this alone. And it also means that they know the best lawyers. Oh, this is how they solved this problem. This is how they raised money. You learn so much by having a community of others around you when you do this, because it's such a hard journey. And I would say burn rate is so important. So you have to keep your costs low. If you have to work out of your basement now with cloud computing and the way things are, you don't have to go and rent an office right away. Can you keep your costs down? A place like ATDC, a community with pretty decent rates. It's great to be around others. I recommend ATDC highly for those in Atlanta, but in every city there are incubators and accelerators that you can work out of. But early on, if you're in software, you're going to spend money on developers and sales. You don't need a head of marketing yet. You don't need a big sales team yet. It's founder-led sales early on. Keep your costs down and try to go as long as you can and get your revenue as high as you can before you raise any money, because depending on the valuation of the company, you'll suffer more dilution in your ownership. So you want to get as far as you can without maybe friends and family is great. Initially, your own capital if you've had success, and bet on yourself and try to get as far as you can without outside money. And really, venture capitalists like our team, we're the rocket fuel for the company that wants to become the next Google. So when you hear, oh, people raise money, that's not really a milestone. They've raised the money, now they got to put it to work and raise again. And so it's not a great thing necessarily that you've raised money, but it does give you the capital if you have the right use of funds to grow your company. But venture is for hyperscale companies that you can get an SBA loan. You can get an inventory loan, some working capital. You could use a factoring company to factor your invoices to get paid quicker. Venture is not the only way to go, but venture is for hyperscale companies. So I'd say good luck to anyone. I'm Frank at siliconroad.vc. If any entrepreneurs out there want to talk to me, the thing about what Zach does and what I do in Atlanta is this is a great community because we're open and we'll meet with people, and I'll try to connect you in my network. So if you'd like to reach out, I'm happy to meet. If you're healthcare, I have some background, and I know other VCs and other angel investors who invest in healthcare. I'm happy to help. It's just we're all helping each other in the Atlanta community, which I really love.
Yeah. Man, Frank, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and just really just flowing out all this wealth that honestly I've thankfully got to experience over the last 4 or 5 years. And yeah, you're a gem, my friend. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us.
Thanks for having me. And for all those who were waiting for my healthcare experience, I'm sorry it's a little stale, but I think the business principles were universal, and happy to help anytime. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.